This week, your due assignment is to dissect some flowers, and so this video will just walk us through. I'm going to be dissecting a few flowers for you and also just showing you sort of what you're going to be looking for and talking through some of the vocabulary words that you're going to need to know in order to do that assignment. So I just have here a whole collection of flowers that I went and gathered about 20 minutes ago. So flowers like this one right here, which is one of the ones that I'm going to dissect for you. A flower like this, you can see all the flower parts. They're really big. You don't really need a microscope or a magnifying glass to see really clearly. And just because it's bigger, it's a little bit easier to work with. We've also got some medium-sized flowers that would be okay too. Ones like this wilted yellow flower could still work because you can see that when you look inside of it, you can still see all the flower parts. And again, it's not so tiny that you can't see it at all without help. If you do have a magnifying glass or something like that, feel free to use smaller flowers, or you're all younger than I am. Your eyesight's a little bit better than mine, so maybe you can see a little bit better. But remember that you also need to be able to draw your observations for this assignment, so you want to make sure that whatever flowers you choose are big enough that you could recreate it in a drawing. So there are 4 flower parts that you're going to be looking for while you're dissecting. Let's see if I can move my camera a little bit. So, 4 different parts of the flower that you're going to be talking about. Sepals, petals, which is probably the part that you have all heard of before, stamen, and pistil. And notice that's I-L, not O-L like a hand pistol, but pistil is a part of the flower that holds the female reproductive system for the flower. So you've got these 4 words, these 4 things you're looking for on every flower, and I'm going to give you a hint right now, and that is that each of these things found on the flower are always found in this same order that I just wrote them down. So sepals first, then petals, then stamen, then pistil. So as you're taking apart every single flower, you'll be finding each of these in order every single time. So if it helps, you can kind of remember an acronym: sepals, petal, stamen, pistil. It's SPSP, and I just think of it as the sound that you make when you're calling your cat. When you go to get them to come, SPSP. If that helps you, you can use that. If not, feel free to just remember it by looking at it in order or referencing this video. But these are the 4 things you're going to be looking for in your dissection, and so I want to make sure that we're keeping those in mind as we're looking. So I'm going to start with one of these little flower blossoms that came from a tree in my neighborhood. So the first flower part that you're looking for is sepals. And the reading's going to talk about sepals and all of these flower parts a little bit more. But sepals are basically like the petals outside of the real petals. So you have the petals of the flower, but then sepals sort of hug those petals and give them more protection. So when you're looking at a flower like this, the petals are usually more easily recognizable because that's what the word that you've heard of before. So all of these little pink ones are the petals, which means that if sepals come first, like if we're taking this apart from the outside in, then sepals are going to come first. So when we look at the stem, you can see 5 little leafy looking, they almost look like petals or almost look like leaves, but that is the sepal. So you've got sepals first, then if I were to strip away all these sepals, then petals would be next. So you can see we're going down in this order. So I'm going to use my tweezers first just to grab onto the sepal and see if I can kind of pull it off that way. And you can see that as I am slowly taking these pieces off, I'm keeping the little flower parts so that if I want to go back and draw them, I have examples of them. And if you write down your flower parts on a list like this, then it can make it easier for you to set them where they go. You don't have to do that, but that might make it easier to answer the questions later. So I've taken some of the sepals off. I want to skip ahead so that you can see some more examples. So I'm just going to do one side of this flower. But if I pull the petals off, and I'm going to use my tweezers to do it carefully, as I pull my petals off, then I reveal another flower part. So remember, if we're going in order, we've seen the sepals, we've seen the petals. Now stamen is going to be the next thing that we see. So a stamen of a flower is the male reproductive part of the flower. So the male reproductive part of the flower is the part that has pollen. And you can actually see pollen in most flowers if it's around the time that flowers are trying to reproduce, which happens to be spring. So this is a perfect time. So these little stringy parts that you can see in the flower are the stamens, and if I grab one with my tweezers and gently pull it off, you'll see that they come right off, and let me see if they'll show up. So we've gotten through 3 levels so far in this flower. Our last level is the pistil. So now that we've seen all of these stamen, I'm going to go ahead and pull them to the side. This flower actually has 2 pistils, and I'll make it really easy to see by pulling away all of the stamens and all the petals, so that all that is left is just those pistils. So if you see, there's 2 little green, they almost look like little arms reaching up towards the sky. Here's one right there and one right there. So those are actually the pistils on this flower. And if you notice, they almost look like little suction cups sort of at the top, or like a little mushroom head or something like that. So that little part right at the top is sort of that landing platform where pollen is going to come in and touch onto the pistil, and when the pollen lands there, then the fertilization for the flower can happen. So those pistils are really hidden inside the flower. If you remember what the flower looked like when we started, here's one that I haven't taken apart yet. Look at all of those petals that have to be moved to the side in order for those pistils and for the stamens, both of those reproductive organs, to show. So this flower is sort of interesting, and it's a good example of how not all flower parts are always going to look the same. So remember, if we're returning to our list of flower parts and we know that we're going to start with sepals, we expect that we're going to see those sepals sort of hugging the petals on the outside of the flower. But when you look at this flower, there's not a really obvious little leafy looking sepal that is hugging these petals. Remember, with the flowers that we dissected before, it was really obvious. These ones, the sepals were actually sort of pinkish color. But on this flower, it's really not very obvious. So on this flower, the sepal is actually just this little green cap-like part. So this might be a flower where if you're dissecting something like this, there's not really a sepal to pull off. So you might want to just sketch it before you pull your flower apart, or if you kind of pull it gently at the base, you'll see that the petals will detach just a little bit. You want to be very careful to not rip all of the parts of the flower off at once. But if you see, I kind of got it started. There's space in between the sepal and the petals now. So now I can go ahead and gently remove the petals. So it looks like I lost one little flower part on the inside of that petal, but most of the petals are off. You can see, again, this is a lot bigger than the last flower, but these long stem looking things, these long white stems with little ends that almost look like little white tails or something like that. Those little white tails on the end are the pollen. Again, pollen's at the top, which means that these long pieces are the stamens. So there's those outside of the flower. And I'm going to continue to pull some of these off so that you can see the last flower part, which is, I think, the easiest flower part to see on this flower, actually. So once I've pulled off all the stamens, I'm going to get this last petal off too. And now we are left with the final part. Final stop on our journey. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the pistil again. So we have the pistil here. The base of the pistil on this flower is really dark green, and then the rest of the pistil curves up. But you might be able to notice that right on the end of that pistil, if I can get it to focus, right on the end of that pistil is again that kind of shape that we saw in the last flower, almost like a little mushroom top or a little suction cup, a little landing platform for that pollen to touch on. This is another type of flower that, looking on the bottom, the sepals are actually really obvious. They almost look like a little pink star on the bottom of the petals. See that? Then the petals are the white ones. And you can see on this flower, the stamens are kind of short and chunky. They're little white bodies with little yellow heads. If I pull one off, that little yellow head is all the pollen. So that means that that flower part's the stamen. And actually, you can almost, sometimes you'll see it get pollen on you. See it right there. Okay, and then this flower, if you remove the stamens, you'll see that the pistil at the center is kind of short and chunky on this flower too. Let's look at another one quickly. Here's an interesting flower. This flower actually has very, very long petals. So at first when you look at it, it almost looks like sort of a trumpet-like horn. But these little green guys at the bottom, that's the first layer, so we know that those have to be the sepals. And if we take off the sepals, the next thing we're left with, hopefully you thought in your head, petals. So the petals that come off are actually this whole purple tube. I just slid it off. When I slid it off, I don't want to just throw it away because I want to look back. I don't know if you can see super well, but do you see those little yellow fuzzy looking parts? Yellow and fuzzy almost always means pollen. So that's the pollen at the top of the stamen. That's our next flower part. And if we're wondering where that pistil is, the last part, remember that we slid these petals off of the sepals. Remember, we actually just pulled this whole tube off. So this last little lone piece sticking out right here is a very, very tiny pistil. And there is a very, very tiny mushroom top on the top of that one too. No matter what kind of flowers you have access to, bigger is a little bit better in this situation, but really any flower that you can find, just do your best. If you get really stuck and you can't find a certain flower part, just guess the ones that you can find. And remember, to turn this assignment in, you need some way to show me what you found. So if it's easier for you to lay out all your flower parts, maybe you want to just arrange them on a piece of paper and then label them and take a picture of it, you could. So if I wanted to do that with my flower, you know, I could arrange my flower parts on the paper and then I can say, I know these are the stamens, I know these are the petals, this is the pistil, and then on this one, remember the sepals were at the base right there. So if you want to do a style like that, you can. If you want to sketch them out, you can. So instead of taking a picture like this, where you just take your picture right there and send it to me, instead you could completely hand draw everything and label it. I'm going to leave it up to you, whichever way is easiest for you to show me what you did. And just do your best, and if you get stuck or if you have any questions, you know ways to reach out to me, and you can return to this video for some extra help. Hopefully this was helpful to you all, and I wish you the best of luck on this week's assignments.